Hey, what's up, YouTube? Goratha here. So today I'm going to talk about the Gladiator Eviscerate build I made for 3.25. A lot of people have been asking me if the build's viable still, if anything changed, how was the build for League Starter, all that stuff. I felt like I didn't even really want to make a video for this because nothing really changed. Like, there's no gym changes, there's no passive tree changes, there's like pretty much nothing changed. There's a couple things I want to say though, so I did want to make a video. I'm probably gonna re-upload the old video and like edit it a little bit. Just throw it in after I talk about the new changes and whatnot. Just because the build's not as fresh in my mind as it was before. It's been like a year since the Settlers launched. Honestly, the build is not as fresh in my mind. So I felt like I would just re-upload the full build guide and just talk about the changes before that. But yeah, anyways, so there's a couple things to note. There was a bug apparently where Lucky Block was being rolled an additional time. So like it was 3 block rolls basically. So you had almost 100% chance to not take damage from hits, which is pretty absurd, honestly. I don't know how that bug would like is in the game for so long. Uh, I don't think it matters actually though. In practice, it doesn't really matter, especially once you get life on block. Your character is immortal. I was testing this on stream without Lucky Block. I can AFK in a T16 with like 100 mobs attacking me, and I won't take any damage basically with Gladiator without having Lucky Block allocated. Max block plus life on block plus a tanky Gladiator build. You're gonna be pretty much immortal on mapping. Now I remember Eviscerate being pretty annoying on some bosses. So if you're planning on playing a bosser, I think Eviscerate is not the best at bossing. You can do all the void stones pretty easily. Like I did all the Ubers on the character. It's definitely doable. It's not the most efficient bossing of all time because you do have to take damage to proc your abilities. It's sort of a mapper, and it's really, really good at mapping. It's really fast, it's really tanky. I can recommend it for sure. Now, Sunder might be a little easier to play at bosses, though, basically. Sunder is also probably the way you'd want to level the character, ideally, if you're trying to be efficient. Again, you have to get block nodes before you start scaling. You have to get the expert retaliation node. All that stuff makes Sunder a little more efficient in the campaign and on bosses. So I wanted to say with that. Like I said, there's really no changes. There is one singular change. Runecraft's gone. This doesn't really affect the damage endgame though. I can show you like, I mean, the damage on this POB is dot cap without the Runecraft. So yeah, the damage is really high. You're really tanky. You're basically immortal. Yeah, it's a good build. Like I said, I'm gonna re-upload the other video on top of this so you guys can kind of see the initial full build guide because nothing really changed. That's fresh. That was fresh in my mind when I made it, and I haven't played the build in like a year, so it's probably more. It's probably better for you guys if I just do that. I wanted to make a quick video though, talking about some of this stuff. There's also one thing I did want to mention. I don't know how Retaliate's gonna be with the mercenaries. It might be a tad annoying to have a mercenary take aggro and like get hit instead of you because you have to get hit to do damage. So ideally, you're probably gonna run a ranged mercenary, I imagine, just because you don't want the mercenary to take aggro. You want to be getting hit. So that's one thing I did want to talk about. It could be concerning if you're running like a melee mercenary and the melee mercenary is taking all the damage that you would otherwise take. That could be a core speed loss. Just something to keep in mind. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out without actually playing it, but it's something I had in mind I wanted to talk about. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that changed. Like I said, not much to say. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys on League Launch. Okay, we're going to go over the full build guide for the Bleed Eviscerate Gladiator. This character was really strong. Like, I felt immortal while mapping, especially once I got life gain block. The damage was a lot higher than I expected it to be endgame. As you can see, like, with this POB setup has over dot cap. Pretty insane. And yeah, it felt really fun to play. Like, the biggest thing I can say about this character is the playstyle is very unique compared to like any other build I've played. And it's very satisfying. Like you have somewhat of a semi like rotation going on at some point when you have like prepared response nodes. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was probably not the fastest build of all time. Like in the campaign, it's a bit slow and clunky early on. That's why I am actually suggesting you level less Sunder if you want to go fast in the campaign. But I actually really enjoyed the process of my character getting a lot stronger, and you could really feel the how it goes from being clunky to like a lot more smooth when you get these nodes in the tree. With that out of the way, I want to quickly mention how the loadout system is working. So this POB is pretty extensive. I spent a lot of time on it. it has different loadouts, which is the new thing in PUB, where you click a loadout, it'll show like the Act 1 tree with Act 1 gear and Act 1 gems. And if you change Act 2, it changes everything. All of this is like synced up, so very easy to follow along. Different items, and we go all the way to like red maps or something. All the items change, tree changes, and the gems change. So it's very easy to follow along with the loadout system. Past that, I also added a ton of notes. A ton of notes. So if you like have some issues, just look at the notes and you'll probably see the solution in the notes. For example, early on you might have some mana issues. This is gonna happen if you have like no gear at all, probably. And I recommend early on to take Spirit of War if you have mana issues. This is 3 extra points, but will completely solve your mana issues, for example. But yeah, make sure you check out the notes and make sure you follow the loadout system. And you should be good to go. I am going to start the build guide off from the very beginning. I'm going to go through every act and quickly explain like the important things in the video. And yeah, let's get started. So early on, I recommend to go to Act 1 loadout. Early on, it doesn't really matter what you have gear-wise. We are using Shield Crush early on, so your shield actually matters more than the weapon, like super early. Now, there is quite a few good uniques, and I'm sure most people at this point in the league will have access to these uniques. They are Lycoside, Stone of Lazar, like all the like typical leveling items like Gold Rim, Blackheart Rings. Lots of good leveling items, but the ones that specifically stand out for this character would be Lazar and Lycoside. Lycoside gives you a ton of flat damage to Retaliate Skills. You're going to be one-shotting like everything pre-Act 5 probably with this shield, just because it has so much cold damage. It doesn't really fit the flavor of the build though, because we're playing Bleed, but it does so much damage that I have to put it into the build guide as an option. This will just easily carry you through like the first 5 acts. And the other item I want to talk about is Lazar. The biggest thing to like keep in mind when you're playing a Retaliate build is you can't actually use Retaliate without blocking. So it's very important to get cap block as soon as possible. And it's also what we're looking for on the tree early on. We're going for the block as soon as possible, pretty much. All these nodes are block and like a little bit of bleed. The reason for this is, like I said, you can't really proc your Retaliate without first blocking, so you really need this. This is very important. Measure Retaliation makes the build feel 1000% better. Like this makes the Retaliate skills feel a lot less clunky. This combined with Prepared Response. But yeah, you can't attack without blocking, so keep that in mind. That's why I mentioned Stone of Lazar here. And how we're getting cap block super easily early on, even without Lycoside, even you can get a way better shield, by the way. Like a rare shield can go up to probably like 50% even this early. It's like pretty high. Let's get like a super low level base that has good block, like for example, just Hammered Buckler. And then you just have like chance to block is a new prefix they can get. And it goes up to, yeah. Obviously you wouldn't have this high early on, but yep, 41% level 28. Pretty solid. This is going to be better than Lycoside for blocking. Yeah, I would definitely use Lycoside if you have one. This is also why early on we are using Tempest Shield. Tempest Shield is going to be dropped later, but early on, like the first couple acts, before we get cap spell block, we run Tempest Shield. Out of Ash is also pretty nice super early on. We're playing Bleed, but this will help the clear speed before we get Bleed pops. We're also dropping this later on too. I do drop Shield Crush around Act 4, Act 5. Pretty much as soon as you get Bladestorm, you can drop the Shield Crush setup and go for the Bladestorm setup. Bladestorm is going to be used the entire way into endgame. It's very, very good for proccing Maim and proccing your Aggravate. Aggravate is a new mechanic that GGG added this league. It makes your bleeding be dealt as if the target was moving. And we get Aggravate from a couple sources. The first source is from Bloodletting. We get 10% here. And then later on, we get 10% from vulnerability. Now, if you're doing your lab and you have a chance at quality, you want to put it on vulnerability because it does come from the quality. So we get another 10% here from Vuln. And then later, like super endgame, we'd have up to 30% Aggravate on gloves. That's where Aggravate comes from. That's the main reason for using Bladestorm. The other reason for Bladestorm is it really is good for Leech. Like we have some Leech on the tree eventually. Early on, we don't really have Leech, but later on, you can get a tattoo. It's the Blood Drinker tattoo. 0.5% attack leech is life, and we also have Blood Rage. So having a little bit of leech from Bladestorm lingering is very good as well. And it also just gives you something to do, because sometimes you'll be in a situation where there'll be like one monster alive and you really want to kill it. but it attacks really slowly. So you'll have to like wait around, and instead of just standing still doing nothing, you can cast Blade Storm. You can also link it later on to like chance to bleed and probably clear with it pretty well. I didn't really do it too much. Definitely an option. As you can see, I don't really have any links on the Blade Storm, mostly. It's there for Aggravate. And eventually we put Maim on Crushing Fist. But yeah, that's the main reason for the Blade Storm. It's just a nice utility ability. You switch that around Act 3, Act 4, whenever you want to, basically. Like, for example, if you have a really good shield and Shield Crush is still doing a lot of damage, you can keep using that. It's completely fine. Your weapon is how you're scaling Eviscerate. This is the most important item. Eventually, we go Jack the Axe for this, like early mapping. And then like a really good endgame weapon. That's what I had in my character. You get a better one in this, but basically just the top end slow weapons, like Reaver Axe is the slowest, has a really high top end. Looking for Fizz damage, and then like Fizz dot multi, and then dot multi. Attack speed's mostly quality of life for this build. I do recommend Jack the Axe though, because it adds a lot of quality of life. It gets a lot of recovery, which is a big issue early on for the build. That's why I have Jack the Axe as my recommended axe as an early game. That's how I got my Force Stones as well. I was using this pretty much until like level 95. Very solid. Determined Survivor basically just gives your shield 50% chance to block instead of whatever the shield has. So it sets it at 50%. Later on, we won't really have to worry about getting a chance to block on the shield like I mentioned earlier. That's just an early on thing. Since we're playing Gladiator, our shield already has 50%. I do recommend taking this second if you can, because Measure Retaliation is so strong that if you can use it, you should use it. It just makes the character feel a lot better, a lot less clunky. And like I mentioned before, Prepared Response is very, very good as well for making the character feel less clunky. We pair this with Crushing Fist. So Crushing Fist Eviscerate to proc more Eviscerates, basically. It's not really for damage, it's just for proccing Eviscerate. However, Crushing Fist is pretty satisfying to use, and you can link it to some utility like Fortify and Maim. This PoE has it current link the Fist of War, just because we have Maim on Blade Storm early on. Very solid ability, and it feels pretty good to use as well. I'm gonna go through the trees real quick. The most important nodes to go for, like I said early on, at block. So prepare response as soon as possible. Spirit of War if you need mana. And Bloodletting is pretty much the only bleed node we take. I do take the chance to bleed early on for Shield Charge, because Shield Charge actually does clear really well. And just getting a little extra chance to bleed is nice. The one thing to consider about Eviscerate is it always bleeds, so we do not need chance to bleed for Eviscerate, but we do kind of want chance to bleed for the other skills. It's you have to decide which you like better, like more damage for Eviscerate or having Shield Charge be able to clear better. I think overall it's better to have chance to bleed early on for Shield Charge. Later on you can drop it for dot multi if you want. And then, like I said, we're going for as much block as possible. We take Versatile Combatant after we have Overcap block. So for example, if you have just barely cap attack block, there's no real reason to take this, because it only works when you have Overcap block. They made Versatile Combatant a lot better this league. We pretty much use it the entire way on this character. And we're also taking some early block nodes that we reselect later. So early on, we went to Desato. These nodes are really good. They give life on block, but the main thing is we get them earlier. So eventually I will drop them once we get the Crow Lab and grab As the Mountain instead. These nodes are more efficient, and we can just take a block mastery for life on block. That's why we have like from Act 5 to Act 8 it changes so much. That's why. We need less block, and these block nodes are more efficient. Blood Magic is not required, honestly. You could probably get away with never playing Blood Magic on this character. It's just a nice early thing you can do to transition into the endgame. Eventually, we do swap to our mana base, and we take Spirit of War, and we take the Mana Mastery. This feels really good once you have minus mana on a ring, and on your amulet maybe. Like 2 minus mana costs, plus the implicit on the helmet. You probably want to least some of this before you swap off Blood Magic. It just feels a lot better to have like minus mana costs. Blood Magic solves all the early annoyances with mana, basically. You'd probably get away with dropping it earlier, though, than in this PvP. Other main thing I want to talk about is Iron Reflexes and Unwavering. So we take Iron Reflexes super early. The main reason for this is because if you evade an attack, you cannot block it. And evade comes before block. So if you have any evasion on your gear, you really want to take Iron Reflexes as soon as possible. This will make it so you get hit more, which sounds dumb, but for this build, that means more damage and more uptime. The same reason why we take Unwavering later. Unwavering makes it so you always get hit, basically, and you're always blocking. The other reason for Unwavering is you actually get stunned when you block. Block does not avoid stun. You get stun based on how much damage the blocked hit would have done to you, like stun-wise. For example, if you block a Shaper Slam, you might get stuck for like 2 seconds because the attack would have stunned you for a long period of time. But if you have Unwavering, you don't get stunned at all. It avoids the block stun. So very important for not getting hit, or very important for getting hit, and very important to not be stunned. The other big note on the tree early on that you really want to get as soon as possible is Indiscriminate Revenge. So these are a bunch of AoE. It doesn't sound like it'd help the single target damage, but the way Eviscerate works is it can overlap and hit twice. And this helps you hit twice a lot easier. Like, you hit twice a lot easier with this. This gives you 2 chances to roll like a high bleed. And it's a lot of hit damage as well. And of course, we're taking the increased duration of ailments super early because Eviscerate always bleeds. It's a very big damage multiplier, and it'll help your early single target quite a bit. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about with the campaign. We do eventually go for all the endurance charges, and endurance charge on kill with the charge duration. And we have charge on block as well from deflection. So you have pretty good endurance charge uptime. And you're pretty much capped block from the tree. These are all the important nodes, and this is like the base tree that would look like before you enter maps. Now, once you're entering maps, we do respec the start, and we go for some suppression. You don't have to go suppression on this character. You could technically never go on the right side and just play more of a max res based character. I do prefer still getting suppression. This is something you could do, though. You could go with this route instead. I definitely prefer, personally, getting suppression, and early on, getting lucky suppression is very solid. And then just getting suppression on gear through like shield, your chest, and whatnot. Maybe even anoint it. I currently have the early anoint as crushing reply. This is because it gives us another link instead of fortify, which is just a big damage increase and very consistent fortify. Eventually, you will be going for no forgiveness, but this is pretty expensive. You need a gold oil and you need prismatic. There's a couple options early on, like even super early on, you could run like Indiscriminate Revenge. This is 3 clear oil. A lot of the Retaliate anoints are actually super cheap, so it's very easy to switch them around. Like this one's like clear, sepia, amber. So you can kind of just use whatever you want. There's a lot of really good early Retaliate nodes. Like for example, Flow of Battles like sepia, amber. You get rage at like level 5 or whatever whenever you put your Stone Lazar on. They're very solid with the anoints. Just choose whichever one you want early. It's fine. I usually went for like the AoE. Pretty nice for early clearing and stuff. Now, super endgame, there is a big respec with clusters. That will be something like this. You can swap to like a Fizz cluster without dropping the right side, but the cluster setup does allow you to drop the entire right side and go for suppression here instead. And we also get easy ailment immunity. So ailment immunity is actually pretty easy on this character, even before you go clusters, because you get 20% from thick skin, and you get 20% on this shield node here. So you get 40% on the tree, and then you can get 60% on your boots. So my endgame boots will look like this right here. 60% avoid ailment. So you pretty much just solve your ailment on tree plus boots alone. Very, very solid, and yeah. No need for Ancestral Vision or Storm Shroud. Now early on, you run Brine King for freeze immunity and Garo Khan for shock immunity, or pseudo shock immunity. And then once you get ailment immunity, you switch to Awakali for reduced damage over time, and Relicash. Yeah, one of the big downsides for this character early on is recovery. We solved that through the Pantheons later and damage over time mastery, as well as some life regen tattoos. We get some decent life regen on the tree as well through Golem's Blood and Warrior's Blood. But it is probably the biggest issue I have with the character super early on, was recovery feeling pretty meh. Now for labs, like I said, we're taking Measure Retaliation pretty much in our first lab or second lab, depending on your block. And then we take Gratuitous Violence for Merc Lab. Now, this is a decision you can make. You can either go Gratuitous Violence to help your clear speed, or more than skill for Lucky Block. Lucky Block makes you kind of immortal. Once you have this node, you're really only taking damage from dots. It's very good, and it procs a lot of your Retaliate skills as well. However, gratuitous violence makes the character feel way better, so I actually recommend taking this node first, even though Warden skill is ridiculous. Bleed pops are so satisfying. It's kind of a crime not to take this in Merc Lab, honestly. You could even honestly even take this in Pro Lab if you take Measure Retaliation first and you have a decent shield. Something to keep in mind. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I'm gonna talk about the trees. The cluster setup is super endgame. There's a couple ways to go about it. You drop the entire right side for suppression cluster, like I mentioned earlier, and you just run a cluster and you get another endurance charge and more damage here and more max res. Or you can play like more of a softcore version and just get more damage, not get the endurance charge. The other thing to keep in mind when you do this swap is you'll need a couple shield block tattoos. This is because we're dropping some shield nodes as well. And we have to make it up with shield block mastery and some nodes on the tree. And yeah, that's everything I want to talk about the tree. We can talk about some of the gear now. I'll talk about the most important gear, starting with Light of Meaning. Now, this gives you a ton of damage for your bleed pops. This is 150% fizz damage because it's hitting so many nodes in this area. It's kind of ridiculous. I'll show you here really quickly with the damage on PUB. It's not really just for Eviscerate though. It's also because it scales the bleed pops. Let's take a look at the other tree to get like a better idea of how much bleed it's adding. So it is a 20% damage increase. This is actually a lot higher early on when you don't have clusters. Clusters kind of skew it a little bit because we add so much fizz damage here. We have a pretty big damage increase, and it helps the bleed pops a lot. That's one of the first items I recommend going for is the Light of Meaning. Obviously, your weapon matters the most, like I mentioned earlier. Your weapon is where all your damage is coming from. Jack the Axe will carry you to Pinnacles, but you do want to replace it if you want to go past that. Your damage goes up a lot. Like, Jack the Axe is good, but a Rare Axe is way better. So, keep that in mind. I gained, like, double damage when I dropped my Jack the Axe. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Another really big item to talk about is Rislas's Coil. Now, a lot of people think the less maximum damage, or less minimum damage matters a lot, but really you're only looking at the more maximum fizz attack damage. For example, if I have a 48-36, which is the perfect roll, and I go to a 48-48, let's change it real quick to 48-48. This would be, a lot of people would think this would be significantly worse, but compare it here, we're losing 1,000 DPS, like 1,000 bleed DPS. And if we look at the config, it's going from 11,000 to 387,000 from with the perfectly garbage less than roll. It goes down to 9,000. So you lose 2,000 flat, like minimum damage. It's not significant at all, considering like we do 400,000 top end. So when you're looking at this item, just look for the more maximum. This is the important roll. The other stats don't really matter as much, but just in general, this item is a really big difference. Look at our bleed DPS without it. It's pretty good. Like, it's a pretty good item. I guess I should mention the Blade Tincture now. Blade Tincture is a lot of damage endgame and even early game. You can run this with Blood Magic, but you have to take Bloodstoke Blade. So early on, you might have to go this route instead. That's another reason maybe to not go Blood Magic, is just try to go for the mana-based Tincture earlier on. This is probably doable. Like I said, you really want to get minus mana on your rings, though, if you're doing this. So if you have access to that, go for it. If you don't, probably worth saying Blood Magic. Kind of like if based on your character, whether or not you have minus mana and like the helm implicit. One more item I want to talk about is the Hateful Accuser. I didn't really use this item that much, but this helps a lot for bossing. This basically spawns a bunch of ads. It replaces your vulnerability with Penance Mark. Penance Mark will spawn ads, which will trigger Cruelty, Fortify. It'll trigger your Retaliate skills. Life on kill, Frenzy on kill. It triggers everything like that. Like, he spawns a bunch of ads to just kind of help you. And this comes from the Ritual boss. It's actually not too bad to get, I think. Or sorry, it comes from the Ritual itself. I found a bunch of them personally when I was doing Ritual for like a day. I found like 3 or 4 of them. They're pretty common, actually. Even in S stuff, you could definitely get this ring. And it's very good for bosses. Like, if you're doing like a Shaper and you don't want to take the Shaper balls, or you're doing like, I don't know, some boss that doesn't hit very much, like the Hunger, for example, something like that. Spawning ads to get hit more, to proc more retaliates. Very useful ring, and I would recommend it on boss fights that you aren't comfortable with. I do recommend for bossing, like Pinnacles early on, or just bossing in general, you can swap Gratuitous to War of Attrition. Especially when you don't have gear, War of Attrition is very, very strong. If you have a lot of gear and you want to just do as much damage as possible, like you have like Dot Cap already, Weapons Master is actually probably better than War of Attrition if you're killing the boss pretty fast already. This gives you 30% more damage against low enemies. Definitely something to keep in mind if you want to do bosses on this character. It does add a lot of damage. Or Dot Cap, so it's like actually not even showing how much it's adding, but yeah, about 7 million on this. And other items to keep an eye out on are Life on Block Schaefer Shield. This is something you should go for as soon as possible. I recommend you reforge life, harvest spam until you get life on block and suppression. You really want to craft on an evasion shield. The last item I want to talk about is Thread of Hope. So Thread of Hope is only in the softcore version. This is a very solid area for it though. Medium Thread gives you Cleaving, Slaughter, Strong Arm, and Crushing Reply. 4 very, very good nodes. So figured I'd throw it out there as an option to go for. I never really went for it because I was playing hardcore and I didn't want to sacrifice the points or the res. I opted to get tankier instead. But definitely an option, especially if you're playing softcore and you want more damage. The Watcher's Eye is also kind of dependent on what you want to do. Malevolence, Pride, if you want more damage. Or Determination, Pride, if you want to be tankier. You don't really need Determination. You actually get quite a bit of armor on this character because we have the Eviscerate Mastery or Retaliate Mastery. 20% armor for each skill you've used recently in the last 10 seconds. This is insane. You actively get like 200% armor easily. Like you're casting like every second like a Retaliate skill. This stacks up pretty fast and it's pretty insane how good it is. Like Determination is definitely not needed. You actually have a ridiculous amount from that. Okay, now let's talk about the gems. I don't want to confuse people, but I have a couple setups here that change depending on your anoint and depending on how you want to play the character. I quickly want to talk about them here. So Extra Retaliation is pretty much always used while mapping. You have the option to switch it out for bossing. Like for example, you want to use Cruelty on bosses and get more damage. Completely fine to do. You really only care about like the big bleed. You'd go for like Cruelty over Extra Retaliation. And there's also the Fortify gem. Now, Fortify is a really good gem if you don't have Crushing Reply and you aren't using Crushing Fist. There is a setup which I have here on the cluster swap, which is just using Bladestorm with Cull and dropping Crushing Fist entirely. This tree would actually drop Prepared Response as well. I wanted to quickly mention it though, because you have the option to not use Crushing Fist. I personally believe that using Crushing Fist with Prepared Response is better, but it is more buttons. And once you have No Forgiveness, you can tactically drop Crushing Fist entirely and just use the Eviscerate only. This is if you want to press those less buttons. Definitely an option. But then as you can see on the softcore setup, I do have Crushing Fist with Fortify, and we're using No Forgiveness, so we're not using Fortify on the main links either. And there's another thing I want to talk about. Cruelty versus Deadly Ailments. So for the softcore tree, I actually put Deadly Ailments in just because once you have too much damage, Gratuitous Violence no longer procs, and Deadly Ailments will help solve that problem. You'll, instead of one-shotting the mobs, you'll have 80% less hit damage, and the mobs will die to bleed more. With Cruelty, you will one-shot the mobs, but you'll have bigger hit damage. And you definitely do not want to use Cruelty and Deadly Ailments together. Now, I do have Awaken Unbound here as well. This is like the best damage link with this current setup. It's going to be a little annoying to swap around though, because you definitely want to have Extra Retaliation. So I don't really recommend this if you have like a white socket to like swap gems around. Or just don't bother and just have Extra Retaliation on. It honestly doesn't matter that much. Like either one is fine. If you want a gem swap, you do a little more damage this way. But yeah. Basically all I want to talk about with the gem swaps. I do quickly want to mention that if you are using the Tincture, you want to have Life Tap with Molten Shell. Your Tincture will make it so your mana goes down to 0. So if you get hit when your mana is at 0, you won't proc Molten Shell. So yeah, you want to have Life Tap here, especially if you're playing hardcore. This will just enable it to always go off. That's one of the more important things I wanted to mention with the gems. The rest of the gems are changing, like I said, depending on whether or not you want to use Crushing Fist. I would 100% recommend using Crushing Fist early on before you get no forgiveness. The ping pong playstyle is just a lot better when you don't have this anoint. I would only suggest like potentially dropping Crushing Fist if you have this. And even then, I still think it's better to use 2 Retaliate Skills. But I put it in here as an option. So I don't want people to get confused about why we don't have Crushing Fists in some of this setups. Just I wanted to give an example of both of them. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about with the gems. And that just about covers everything. If you guys have any questions or comments, make sure you comment in the video below. I'll post the PUB link to the setup here. And yeah, if you guys liked the video, make sure you don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll see you guys next time.